Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. We are going to get started in just a few. I was just joined by Gwen, our presenter today, for our webinar on navigating meal times with your selective eater. This is going to be a really fun, informative session, and we're so excited that all you guys are here. We have some fun surprises along the way, including some freebies that we're going to share. Okay, I am going to go ahead and start with some of the housekeeping things. My name is Allie Evans. I am the Director of Marketing and Business Development for Emerge Pediatric Therapy, as well as the Therapeutic Edge, our resource shop. And this is our August webinar in a series of webinars that we've been doing this year. There has been so much great information shared. We've been having so much fun. I have learned so much. That's kind of my favorite part of getting to do these is I get to learn from the experts that we have on our team. So today, Gwen is going to be talking about navigating meal times with your selective eater. And she's got some great tips and some great insight. And it's just going to be a really fun time. If this is your first webinar with Emerge, I did want to share with you that, like I said, this has been in a series, and this is the August installment. But I'm linking the our YouTube page into the webinar chat because after each of our webinars have completed, we upload them to YouTube. So if there's a topic that catches your eye and you want to check out and rewatch, none of them are more than 45 minutes, so it shouldn't take too long to get caught up and get connected. So we would love for you to go back and enjoy any of the other info sessions that we've had. There have been some really great ones. So again, I'm Allie. I'm not going to be who's presenting to you today. I'm just going to cover some of the, like I said, the housekeeping things. First housekeeping item is that these webinars are actually made possible by a couple of really fabulous sponsors. Local businesses that wanted to jump on board with us and take the opportunity to keep these webinars free and accessible and available. And they did so by becoming the sponsors. So first up is Ashley Brackett. Ashley is a real estate agent in the Triangle area. She brings over 8 years of experience in real estate. She provides excellent customer service, and she's a really great listener. She works super hard for her clients and provides really quality service to build relationships with her clients, and more importantly, maintain those relationships by being a clear communicator, something that we've actually talked about a lot at Emerge. Ashley is originally from the Raleigh Chapel Hill area and is local with her husband and their son. And just like our team at Emerge, Ashley is super flexible and creative, focusing on her clients' needs, and works really, really diligently on their behalf to protect and promote their best interest throughout the entire buying and selling process. And I've actually known Ashley since I was in middle school. She is my best friend's older sister, so I have been lucky enough to know her for a very long time, and we are very lucky to have her as a sponsor. Our other sponsor is Carrie Estate Planning. Carrie Estate Planning actually came to us and said, we want to be involved with what you guys are doing. How can we help? How can we support? How can we provide more opportunities? And this was the perfect fit for them to join in as a webinar partner. So Carrie Estate Planning is North Carolina's trusted estate planning law firm. They are proud to support Emerge Pediatric Therapy. Like I said, they were so excited to jump on board to make this opportunity possible for us and for our clients and their amazing families. They believe in a client first approach with transparent pricing and team support from start to finish, leading to an overall positive experience. They are passionate about tailored planning that best suits their clients, not just getting something on paper. They have offices in Cary, Raleigh, and Chapel Hill, so they're kind of our neighbor at all of our clinics as well. And they can provide services for all of North Carolina. So if you have been thinking about accessing services like this, getting your will done, or you have questions about planning for the future, or you just need an update to any of the plans that you've already made, they say this is your sign, and they offer complimentary introductory calls and can get those scheduled today. So you can see that information there for Ashley and Carrie Estate Planning. And even if you just want to give them a shout and say, thanks for making the Emerge webinars possible. I learned a lot and I had fun, and I hear you're to thank. We encourage that too. So, all right, that's kind of my bullet points for now, and I am going to get out of the way and let the expert take over. So, Gwen, it's your turn.
Okay. So, Oh, okay. So today we're going to be talking about how to navigate meal times with selective eaters. Just some ways that we can kind of pinpoint which areas are giving them the most trouble. So, a little bit about me. I graduated from Utica College in Central New York in 2016 and have been with Emerge since 2022. My specialty area is in feeding, but I dabble in all sorts of other areas because I can't focus on one thing. So, some of my trainings for feeding that I've done are Beckman, SOS, TOTS training, so some tethered oral tissues like tongue ties, lip ties, things like that. AEIOU, sensory motor approaches. I've done some interoception and adapted baby-led weaning and some food scientist things as well. I feel like in my practice, I use a lot of principles from floor time. So I mentioned that here as well, because I like to keep things fun and play-based. Currently, my role at Emerge is I'm the feeding team lead, and I'm also a clinical lead in our Carborough office. And my role is kind of developing feeding skills across our clinics and trying to spread information any way that I can. So that's kind of my role. Some of our objectives for today's webinar are identifying sensory's role in meal times, identifying pressure and its impacts on meal times, understanding how to recognize stress cues, because that's a really big thing that we're seeing in a parent report for the most part. There are subtle little signs that can kind of pinpoint us into, oh, we're getting a little bit uncomfortable, and then, oh, we're really, really uncomfortable. So that's a really important one that we're going to get into. The progression of food exploration and kind of using sensory ideas of how that should typically go. I say typically because everybody is very individual and different. And then also how to increase engagement in meal times as a whole. Oops. Oh boy. Okay. So here are some of the common reports that I hear from a lot of families. The first one is trouble staying at the table, meltdowns around meal times, an unwillingness to try new foods, throwing, scattering items, really wiggly at meal times. Maybe the kid is like more of a grab and go type. They want to be in constant motion throughout. That's something that we hear pretty commonly. And then also decreased focus at mealtimes. I also have been hearing that mealtimes are taking a long time because of some of these other factors. So those are some of the things that I commonly hear. So just wanted to mention them here. Okay. One of the main things that we always look at are our sensory systems. So I included the pyramid of learning here. So I feel like this can kind of give us some good information of how sensory is impacting some of these higher level skills. So in the blue at the bottom, you see all of our sensory systems, except interoception isn't listed there. We're going to get into that a little bit later too. So we have olfactory, visual, auditory, gustatory, tactile, vestibular, and proprioception. So sometimes when we are having difficulty processing some of this information, or maybe our body is benefiting from much more of one type of input, but we're also sensitive to another one, coming from a sensory-based approach to support those sensory needs can help with some of these higher level skills. So those higher level skills are the ones in green, yellow, and red. When we're talking about feeding, a lot of times we're working within that red zone. So the daily living activities up there. I feel like I've also heard a lot of people report like difficulty with like mealtime behavior. So behavior is mentioned up there as well. Behavior stems from somewhere. Generally, there's a reason. So if we kind of dig into what that reason might be, we're able to then support and create that just right challenge that is kind of impacting that. So those are those ones there. And we're going to get into some of the sensory systems in a minute. So just wanted to mention those. So food is pretty sensory. So these are all the sensory systems that you're using around mealtime. So if a food is coming out of the kitchen, you may get some smells first. So you may get some of that olfactory sense first. Although some foods have bigger smells than others, stronger smells. So maybe the first interaction that you have with the food is going to be what it looks like when it's presented to you. So you might notice that it's wet or It looks bumpy, it looks smooth, it's a bright color, like a carrot is bright orange. So you're noticing some of those side pieces. You might notice, I think this food is familiar, but it looks a little bit different. Maybe it's a different brand of pizza, or maybe it's a sandwich that's not cut diagonal, but it's cut up and right up vertically. So maybe that's what you're noticing. So generally, we're seeing sight. If you are engaging further with the food, probably the next thing that you're going to do is either use a utensil or pick it up. So then we're adding in some of that touch, some of that tactile. When you're moving the food, it's probably going to make some sort of smell, sorry, some sort of sound. So if you're moving it, maybe it crunches when you pick it up, or maybe a piece falls off and it hits the plate, so it makes like some sort of sound there. So maybe we'll hear some sounds along with those, but we're also engaging with the touch. So when you're touching it, you might notice it's dry, or it feels wet, it leaves a residue on your hand, things like that. From there, generally, we're moving towards more smell because we're making it go closer to our face, and then our taste. So smell is what gives us the idea of what a food likely will taste like. Some foods smell very different than they taste, so that's another piece there. But then we're going to get the taste, and then we're going to break it down and do some chewing with those things. Interoception is listed here, and I have another slide about that too, but it is important to think about those interoceptive senses and their ability to recognize hunger cues. We'll get into that a little bit more, but I just wanted to mention it now. Okay, so how sensory impacts feeding. So we're starting with the visual system. So these are some of the things that you may notice as you're presenting a food to a kid that can indicate maybe we're either seeking out more visual or we are overwhelmed by the amount of visual. So something that we'll frequently see is we'll put the food on the plate and your child is looking in any direction other than where the food is, or it seems like they're like looking through the food, like they're not really attending to it. They may be pushing themselves away. You can see in this photo, this child is turning as far as they can get away from that broccoli. That's something that we'll see. Kids may scoot their chairs back. They may rotate their whole body away from the food. We'll see leaning back, which can be somewhat subtle, which you may be like, oh, maybe they're just relaxing in their chair, but they're creating some more space from whatever food that is. You may see increased blinking or eye watering when they're trying to attend to the food because of some of those signs of stress. They may push the food away on the plate, scatter it to make it disappear. Um, you may see squinting as a means to limit the amount of visual that they're letting in. Some other pieces that you may see is gagging when you're presenting the food just based on how it looks. And then there's the opposite. They may tend to seek out a food of or foods of one particular color. And they may also avoid the same food if it looks different, kind of like I mentioned before with like the cutting of the sandwich. So those are just some things that we can kind of look into to kind of see, is this a visual piece that's the most challenging, or is it coming from another system? A lot of times there's overlaps between the systems and what sense we're kind of triggering too. So we can kind of talk about that too. So then we have the olfactory system, so our smell. So if a food is giving off some sort of odor, they all have some sort of smell. Eye watering happens here too if the smell is really strong. So that's kind of that overlap with that visual system as well. And the turning their head away to create space from how it looks and how it smells. They may make a negative facial expression like a grimace or something when they're getting a big smell. They might even plug their nose. A lot of times what I hear is kids tell me, oh, that smells disgusting, which I tend to try to reframe those words into something more objective. So asking, oh, what do you mean by that? Or does it have a big smell? Does it smell salty? Does it smell sour? What about that smell is too big for the client at that time? So they may cover their nose here, coughing and gagging when they're getting a smell of a food. On the opposite end, they may explore first by smelling. So before they're doing anything with the food, they're gonna bend down and like take a big whiff of what it might be like. You may notice that they're smelling their hands after touching them, touching the food, things like that. They may also have a preference for a certain type of smell coming off of food too. And we'll see that with taste as well. Our next system is the tactile system. So that touch, so they may avoid touching the food in general. They may just use their fingertip to touch instead of like using their whole hand, because then they're going to be able to limit the amount of touch that they are getting. Um, they may just want to move it with a utensil. So a child that maybe you're doing a chicken nugget with ketchup. So the ketchup sticks to your hand a little bit. They may want to use a utensil while they're exploring that food and kind of eating that one, as a means to avoid the wet tactile sensation that they would get from the ketchup. One that I see pretty frequently is a kid is engaging with the food with their hand and then they're pulling back and they're splaying their fingers like this, or they're immediately going to like wipe their hand on themselves or a napkin. So that can be a sign of that tactile sense is too big. So they are very sensitive to that feeling on their hands. We like to implement tools to help us kind of work through that. And we'll kind of talk about that too. They may avoid certain textures of food. So a kid that avoids things that appear wet, or sticky, things that leave crumblies on their hands. So like a cheese puff, maybe that leaves kind of a residue, things along those lines. Or something when you bite into it, there's juice. So maybe they prefer to take a bite out of a whole fruit instead of having sliced foods. So you may see that too because they're avoiding that wet tactile sense, but they like the taste. Um, they may seek out a particular texture of food, so they're really liking soft foods, or they like crunchy foods, things like that. And then the opposite, they could also want to engage more with their hands. So maybe before you're giving them something that typically they are able to use utensils, totally fine, and they're using their hands to kind of eat instead. That can be a sign of them wanting to know what it feels like prior to putting that food into their mouth. Then we have our taste. So grimacing is back in this one too. You may see after they take a taste that they are making a facial expression. Something I'll see is like a full body shudder. So thinking about if you have a new eater, when they're taking a taste of something, these are kind of the signs that they're getting because they're getting a new sensory experience. We see this in older children as well, if it's something that is new to them. So if it's kind of like if you were to eat a lemon, generally you do have some sort of shudder because it's a big sensory experience. So thinking about if they're doing a shudder, it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't like the food. It could, but it doesn't necessarily mean, oh, they tried it, they did a shudder, they don't like that. It could just mean that they have to investigate further, have a few more trials before they are used to the sense and the sensation that that is providing them. Gagging can happen here too. And they may have a preference for one type of taste similar to um, the smells and things like that. If a response is from texture, the response will typically be immediate, while taste will typically come a few seconds later, which can kind of help you decipher what sensory system is being impacted the most. Um, So then we have auditory. So there can be avoidance of foods that have increased sounds. This could also be that they're having trouble at shared meal times because they are hearing other people chew or engage with food. So that can be something that's sensitive as well. Um, but they may avoid crunchy foods or avoiding loud eating environments. So, sorry, they're having difficulty eating in the cafeteria because there's lots of sounds going on. Um, Maybe as you're pouring things from pots and pans that are kind of clanking together, you're seeing like a lot of eye blinking, which can be a sign that they are a little bit sensitive to those sounds coming off of those pieces, which can then make us avoidant of experiences or settings where we're going to have that increased sound. We may see them covering their ears during meal times. And then on the opposite, we may see that they are creating like repetitive sounds with their mouth, or they're tapping utensil on the table to increase auditory stimulation. Some kids benefit from background sound to increase engagement. So that's kind of where that is coming from. Um, and also, like, do they eat better and do they seem more focused when you have like music on in the background or things along those lines? Um, And then we have vestibular. So, some signs that they may be a little bit sensitive to this could be keeping their head stationary. So, if they're going to drink from a cup or something, they're having a hard time tipping their head backwards because that is giving them increased vestibular input, which can really challenge balance and proximal control and their ability to sit upright. Goodness gracious. Okay, so we'll see that they have a little bit of trouble tipping and drinking from a cup, and they may have preference for a straw cup instead. Um, they may have difficulty when you sit them in the chair and then you help push them in towards the table. Maybe they're like, whoa, that was so crazy fast. That felt like a really big experience for them. Um, it could be that they aren't really liking being lifted up into the chair. That same kind of idea that this is a big movement that may be giving them a little bit too much information. And on the opposite, they may be really wiggly when they're sitting in their chair. Maybe they're like switching positions, even like falling out of their chair, things like that. Um, I will frequently use movement to help with increasing energy levels since our vestibular system is so closely linked to our level of arousal and our energy overall. If a child is having difficulty maintaining engagement and being focused and they have like a pretty low level of energy, I generally will recommend doing some sort of movement prior to meal times just to kind of like jump us up to a more like just right area of energy for the activity. So sometimes I could recommend doing like some animal walks or runs, jumps, things like that. So now we have interoception. So interoception is huge because this is essentially our ability to identify internal subtleties. So a big one is hunger cues. Another one that is pretty big is our need to use the restroom. But I have this picture to the side that kind of pinpoints all of those. Regulation and our processing of the previous sensory systems really impacts their ability to identify some of these cues. Oh my goodness. So, if they are in a heightened level of arousal, a heightened energy level for activities, it can make it really hard to check in with your body. It's kind of like if you were having an anxious response or a fight or flight response, you're probably not really checking in with some of those subtle internal cues and more so survival. So, identifying those sensory pieces prior can really help with identifying those hunger cues and kind of working forward with that. If a child is feeling overwhelmed by any of those senses previous, you'll probably see decreased engagement in meal times and an increased level of arousal. So that can make it harder for them to focus on meal times or difficulty sitting still. They're not able to engage with the food because they are feeling really, really stressed about it. Could even be just the food existing on the table or in the kitchen. Um, Sometimes it can be based on the demand of it's a mealtime. We want you to eat. So obviously that is the goal, but sometimes we need to take a pause before we get to those demands. Okay. So
Hey, Gwen.
oh, sorry. Yes.
No, you're good. You're good. We have a question, and I felt like this was maybe a good like transition
Mhm.
period. So, the question that we got says, "What are ways that we can teach children or help them identify their hunger cues?" And I feel like that's really important because you kind of just talked about the idea of like the regulation that needs to take place before
Mhm.
even coming to the table. And I'm sitting here thinking too, like, what can I be doing as like a a co-eater at mealtimes to like
Mhm.
support regulation, but I'm just thinking of ways like this question made me think like what are some things that we can do before we even get to the table to like get ourselves to a good regulation point for ourselves and for all of the people enjoying that mealtime for us, including hunger cues or like my day was really stressful and I need to fully transition into like mealtime mode and not let the like lingering things of the day enter this experience.
Yeah, I would say talking about that interoceptive sense of the hunger cues, everyone has a range of like the size of their cue. So some people may not recognize their need to eat until they are like starving. So they're having their sensitivity to that is very small. So they need like a really big response in order to feel that. While
Okay.
some people, they're like, I'm starving, but they are only a little bit hungry. So there's kind of a range in general for all people. Generally, my recommendation, obviously, this is dependent on the age of the child, but I usually recommend doing like interoceptive um, modeling. So, for example, I'm feeling cold. So you find the problem and then you're going to model a solution. So, like, I'm feeling this way. I'm going to get a jacket. So, like, doing very concrete things like, I know this, there's this. That one can sometimes be a little bit easier to do. Generally, if we're looking at the ability to check in with those internal subtleties, I would recommend looking into full sensory systems to um, get overarching regulation because that will make it easier for them to check in with their body if they're not in fight or flight. So that's going to be the key to make sure that they are regulated because it's hard to work on interception and feeling those things if we are heightened or even really low. So finding that just right space in general, for most of the kids that I see, adding in like heavy work, so pushing, pulling, climbing type of activities, that's going to be a big one for regulating and settling the nervous system to then be able to kind of work into some of those higher level pieces. Um, there are times specifically around mealtime that can keep them kind of high. And that will kind of like come into some of the pressure things that we're going to talk about in a little bit too, because pressure really impacts that as well. Um, did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think
Let me
just
know if it
the
didn't.
no, 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 just like the general idea of like just like when you go to the gym, you need to like stretch and be
Mhm,
hydrated and like be in a good mental space. Or before you go into like a work meeting, you need to have done like the prep that comes along with that. Like
mhm,
meal times should be viewed as the same kind of opportunity that like practice and experience and
mhm,
regulation and like it's a thoughtful time. And I think
mhm,
we especially I know like me as an adult, like I don't necessarily think of a mealtime as a thing that I need to be doing like a lot of like focusing on or thinking on. But if I do some like prep work beforehand and I think about like my own personal regulation and like the type of day that I've had and like how I'm feeling about tomorrow, did I sleep well last night? Like those are all things that can go into like a more successful mealtime, just like staying hydrated for the gym or preparing for work meetings or doing your homework so you're ready the next day. Like it all of those just like preparation is so helpful.
mhm. I agree. I find that like if I have a really busy day at work, I may find myself leaning into more of like a girl dinner that is just like sporadic little pieces of food instead of like sitting down for a whole meal. So that
Mhm.
can really impact those things too.
Absolutely.
Okay. So step one is going to be sensory, supporting sensory needs first. So engaging in sensory experiences that support the body. So, like we kind of mentioned before, heavy work, movement, tactile exploration. This is very dependent on the child because not everything will work for everyone. But if you're looking at those previous sensory signs, this can kind of cue you into what's happening. So, if they're really wiggly at the table, they probably need some more movement. Um, Although, depending, sometimes a little bit of movement can really spike their level of energy instead of bringing them down. So, if that were the case, I would add in some heavy work. So, that's like pushing, pulling, climbing, like a bear hug or pushing into the wall. I will frequently use like a TheraBand around the legs of the chair so they can like kick into it. I have kids that I recommend doing like animal walks before they get to the table, or they're going to jump their way, or like here I mentioned doing transitional activities to kind of, we've done the heavy work prior or the movement or the exploration prior, and now we're kind of moving towards mealtime. So if they have like a toddler tower, they can push it over to the sink to wash their hands. If they are older than having a toddler tower, they can help move, push chairs in, or get kind of those pieces set up for meal times. Um, I generally have them help me wipe down tables because that pushing and pulling of like a towel over a surface can kind of provide some of that deep pressure, that proprioceptive input, and that heavy work. And then I add some exaggeration when I'm this one here, like pushing a plate into the table to make it stick. I will say if you have breakable plates, maybe don't do that because some kids are a lot stronger than they look and they could break. But generally, like if it's a plastic plate or silicone or anything like that, or if it's just really sturdy, you can have them like exaggeratedly like push it in so it sticks, so it doesn't move around. I also really like using animal walks to kind of do those transitions too. Or they can help carry something over to the table to kind of help. Some generally, I recommend something that has some sort of weight, but also being mindful of breakables, and that can come sometimes be a little bit tricky too. But making sure that we're supporting those sensory needs first, getting us ready. And I generally find that trying to do like small alterations of a family's already established routine is the easiest to implement. So try not to like recreate their whole routine because that can make it feel like way too hard and harder for them to implement, especially if they are a family that has multiple children that they're trying to all coordinate or coordinate schedules too. That can be kind of tricky. Um, I like to use tools. I'm big on tools, and sometimes just the novelty of using a tool can just be the thing to kind of like get them over a barrier. Um, so here are some of my favorite tools. So toothpicks I use to like, you can poke things. It's fun to poke things. You can also poke little teeny tiny things. So like if we are investigating a newer food, a toothpick is going to generally hold a lot less than like a fork. So that kind of limits their taste. So sometimes it can seem less new and less scary because they are using a small tool that is going to give them a smaller amount of information. Um, I like using chopsticks. I will typically use a kid safe one or a kid friendly one because this type of chopstick is a little bit harder motor planning wise, but also tongs. I really like using a chopper. That can be good for meal prep as well as kid safe utensils um, because they're going to get some chopping. So maybe they're going to be touching some things. They're going to be getting more tactile exploration with that and learning more about what that food's properties are. And I like this chopper because you have to manually push it. So you're getting some of that regulating input prior to having it presented in front of them. So I'd like to use all these tools. I also always have something available for them to wipe their hands if they are engaging with something, touching it, and then are like, whoa, that was a lot of sensory input. I need to clean that off. So having them have the things there so that they can maintain engagement and their sense of safety, because that is like the biggest piece, the safety and the connection during meal times. Um, and then the presentation of food. So a lot of times I'll use more than one plate. I tend to use a lot of plates because if there's something that feels uncomfortable to them, that is a little bit new that they're just visually checking in with, you might want to put it a little bit farther away and giving them the ability to, we can't throw it on the ground, but like we're going to move it a little bit farther away from us to make our sense of safety increased. Um, I also will use containers or like a towel. So let's say they were really looking at a food and then they're like, whoop, too much. Or they were taking tastes of a food and then, or the smells were becoming too much. You can just cover it up with a towel or putting another plate over top. Or if it's like a Tupperware container, you can just put the rest of the lid on top. So it decreases the visual, the smell, all of those pieces. Sometimes it'll feel like pressure if just the food is existing in their presence. So sometimes closing that up. Generally, if that's the case, I will do some like playful like opening and closing. So like, oh, is it still in there? Yep, we'll close it back in. And then a lot of times kids will be like, oh, I want to see. So we might get some more visual engagement because they're feeling like, oh, this isn't as scary. It's more playful. I'm seeing it, I'm learning about it. And then it's actually not as bad as I thought. Um, Always allowing access to preferred foods and alter the presentation of foods if needed. So if you're filling up their plate with a meal that has four different foods, maybe decrease the amount of food that's on their plate, or maybe we're going to work on one food at a time. Although some kids like all of them at the same time, and that is totally fine. But if you find that all of the foods on the plate or all of the foods on the table at the same time are becoming more challenging, you're noticing more like wiggling, trying to get away, decreased engagement at meal times, that can kind of be a factor as well. Um, when you're engaging with foods or engaging in mealtime routines, it's great to make it playful if you can. Noticing your child's stress cues, which we'll talk a little bit more of as well. We talked about some in the sensory section, but we'll talk a little bit more. And then decreasing pressure and allowing space for them to explore and move things closer to their face. So a lot of times kids learn best through play. So trying to keep it playful and fun. I like making little faces or different things with their food so that we can kind of investigate those and take some tastes. I find that a lot of times the faces usually are a hit. And then all of a sudden they're like, eat an eyebrow, or their eye will go missing or something. And generally they're like, oh no, that's so funny. So some of those things just to kind of keep it exciting can make it a little bit easier for them to engage. I think allowing space is huge because a lot of times we're so wanting them to eat that we're like, okay, just take a taste, just do this, just do that. But that is creating a lot of demands and not really allowing them the space to look and then get closer to investigating and bringing towards their face. So that you may notice that they're just looking at the food for a little while and then they're going to use their fork to move it around on their plate. And then they're going to move it towards their face. I think it's important to allow exploration like that to then increase their ability to ingest the food. A lot of times we have limited times for mealtime, so sometimes that can be a factor of, oh, we only have 30 minutes. We don't have time for this. We need to kind of rush. But as we're expanding diets and kind of increasing these mealtime routines, it's important to allow that space, which every day you're not going to have it, but when you can, I would say that is a recommendation for sure. Um, Here are some of the big stress cues. So, diverting their gaze, looking away really quickly, turning away, changing the topic of conversation. Maybe you're looking at green beans or they're on their plate. And then all of a sudden they're talking about like, I don't know, unicorns or something. So they're like, really like, maybe I can distract them and they'll forget the green beans exist. So if they're doing that generally, or all of a sudden they're like eating their dinner and they're like, oh, wow, look at what our dog's doing. A lot of times that can be like, oh, this is too much. I'm going to try to focus on something elsewhere. Um, Getting up from the table, shuddering, gagging, and then all those other sensory signals of distress. So typically you have a window of like 2 to 3 stress cues before you've like completely lost them. So being very like wow, observing all of those small pieces can really impact engagement. So like if you're seeing a little stress cue because they are smelling the food. Maybe we'll bring the food a little bit farther away and we'll really focus in on another sensory system. So like if smelling's really hard, maybe we'll go back to just like touching with our hands and doing things like that. Um, or we'll present a balance of, okay, here, why don't you have another, whatever their preferred food is? Why don't you have another one of these? And then we'll come back to whatever this is. because sometimes it's just like the reset that their body needs. For some kids, just asking a question can be helpful. So like, oh, does that one kind of crunchy to you? And then they'll be like, oh yeah, or no. That can be a good way to kind of like break up those stress cues too, because you're just asking them like an objective question. Does this one snap in half? Is that one green? Does that one look, or does that face look happy or sad, or if you make a face on the plate or anything like that. So those are just some ways that I kind of try to elongate their engagement in meal times in general. And then there's the area of pressure. So um generally pressure is when you're applying a demand. So kids get demands all day long, so it's just kind of part of life to some extent. But um, this can make meal times really, really challenging because they're just feeling like eating is a demand and it is hard. So we try to limit these kinds of phrases. So, like, just try it. Like, you don't even know that you don't like it because you haven't tasted it, things like that. Or you have to eat 3 green beans before you can get a cookie, things like that, because they're like, that creates another piece where, oh, green beans are not as good as cookie because I have to do this to get the prize of the cookie, which kind of places importance and weight on different foods, which can then make it more challenging. It makes it seem like green beans aren't great. Um, or you have to eat all of this before you get dessert. And it can even be just like holding a food out for a kid to take from your hand. So it really depends. That one will be really, really dependent on if the food is new and they don't know much about it, or if it looks different, that you might see them go, whoop, I don't want that, and kind of like back away. So those are some things that I generally look into just to kind of see to try to decrease those pressure cues. When we're adding pressure, you're going to see the sensory signs and you're going to see the stress cues. Generally, I have the most success when I decrease pressure. Usually that increases safety and engagement. So it seems counterintuitive, but if you decrease pressure, a lot of times they will feel more comfortable to then move forward in their engagement and their learning and their ingestion of the foods. Um, so, like I said there, so decreasing that pressure really, really increases their ability to intake more, to engage and be curious about the foods that maybe previously they were like, I don't even want that any in the room with me. Um, and then some of these other areas are key to check into around mealtime. So, um, are they feeling well? Do they have a stomach ache? Do they have a headache? Do they have a cold so they're not able to breathe as deeply? Really checking in to make sure that these aren't impacting their ability to eat the food. Um, is the food appealing to their system? So it could be they don't like wet. So wet is going to be really hard, but how can we change that food to make it more dry? So sometimes I will cut a piece of an apple and I'll dry it off with a towel, or maybe we'll start with like a freeze-dried apple, things along those lines. And then that regulation. So if they're not able to regulate and they need help, or we can't regulate at all, that's really going to impact their ability to engage in foods. These are some of my key ways to decrease some of that pressure. So starting with regulation, creating a balance between preferred and non-preferred foods so that you can maintain that engagement and maintain that safety. Again, allowing space for them to explore the food, using multiple plates, and allowing the child to gain some control. So let's say you have 2 foods, you're putting them on the plate at dinner time. You can allow them to tell you how much of each food that they want on their plate or where. Or do you think we should take, or should we do this one or this one first? Or kind of allowing them a sense of control, and so that they're increasing that safety, and then allowing the use of tools. Some of my tips are building routine. So keeping the routine pretty consistent. Make the table time about connection instead of about like the demand of eating. So really checking in, doing things as a family. That's why I also think it's very important to do meal times together. because then they're also going to see you eat foods, you engage with foods, and seeing that visual model generally increases their engagement with the foods because they're like, oh, this food it's got to be safe. Like mom's eating it, or dad's eating it, grandpa's eating it, somebody. So doing meal times together can be really helpful for that. Starting with more preferred foods first. So if you're doing a mealtime, you're probably wanting to lean more into more foods that they know about that are safe. And then adding in, like, as you're building this routine, one or two that may be a little bit different. And then as time goes on and that seems to be going well, we can add in more challenges with those once they know that they have that safety. And then increasing the challenge to more non-preferred foods. Generally, the progression that I recommend for um, investigating some of these foods would be going visual, tactile, olfactory, gustatory, and then ingestion. So generally, we'll start looking at the food, giving them time to kind of do that. You can even do this with like a tool. So we'll use like a kid safe knife to see if we chop it, does it have juice? Or if you squish it, does it get flat? Things like that, squishing with a utensil. And then you can kind of move into tactile. I'll have them generally I'll like try to like move something around maybe with my finger, or I will try to squish it into a pancake just with one finger. If they're feeling comfortable with that, maybe I'll move to like a whole hand squish, or I'll have them put it in their palm and we'll like, do you think we can squish it if we squeeze it? So we'll do something like that. Um, and then after that, they don't even have to bring the food up to their face to smell it. They can put it down and just smell their hand. One of my frequent questions is, does it smell like the food or does it just smell like finger? And the kid's like, oh, I don't know. I actually did it with a kid's elbow yesterday because we were doing like some WWE moves in therapy. But thinking of how those smells go, if that seems to be going better, we can see like, oh, does our hand still smell stronger, or does the food, or is it the same? Um, and then we're bringing it closer to our face. We're kind of like progressing and seeing how that's going. If they're having like a response like that, I'm not going to push farther. I'm going to redirect into something else in that sense that they were having success in. And that may just be where we are for now. But it is like a road to eating. So thinking about some of those pieces, that they're all a piece of the path, but sometimes we can't jump from point A to point Z without doing those steps in between. It's kind of like, maybe some people do this, but running a marathon without training seems like a really good way to get hurt. So thinking about like, we need to maybe do some training, do some learning about how to get from here to there. Um, and then, like I mentioned before, if they're not maintaining engagement in that step, they're not ready to really move further. And then allowing that time for them to explore so that they have that just right challenge, so that we're decreasing like behaviors at meal times. And then think we've got these pieces for Allie.
Yeah. So just talking about like exploratory eating. So we have put together some sensory support placemats on our resource shop, which is the therapeuticedge.com. Almost all of the info and courses and resources there are coming from our team of therapists or our owner who's an OT. And it's just a really great kind of one-stop shop for a lot of resources, teachers, parents, caregivers, summer camp babysitters. So if you scan that QR code, we actually have these rainbow themed placemats for free on our website all weekend. And yeah, so there's a lot of questions about like, how does this food feel? Can you smush it between your fingers? What happens if you stack the red food on top of the orange foods? So this is going to be a really great opportunity for some exploratory eating at the table and some fun, and making maybe new foods or some unsure foods feel a little bit more approachable, and really put some of these things that Gwen has been telling us about like into practice at the dinner table with some guided questions and things like that. So we recommend printing them out and laminating them. Otherwise, they're going to get a little messy. But yeah, that way you can use them over and over, and hopefully the questions on there stimulate some fun conversation around meal times, and make you feel more confident as the person who is trying to support someone through maybe a sensory heightened experience at the table. So then this QR code, keep your cameras out. This will take you to Emerge's initial inquiry page. If you are interested in getting started with feeding support with Gwen or one of our other feeding specialists, or you're interested in occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, any of the services that we offer at Emerge, you can scan right there and you'll get straight to our website. You will get connected with someone on our team, and we will put you in front of the right person that you should be working with. So that might be Gwen, but that also might be one of the other incredible therapists that we have on our team across 3 locations at Emerge. I think you click. So this is the easiest way to get connected with Gwen directly is through her email with any questions. I did have one person that I wanted to allow to, I think, ask a question, but I know we've gone a little bit over, but it's just because there's so much fun and exciting information that can build more confidence and better experiences around mealtime. So thank you, Gwen, for such a wealth of info and just for sharing so much. I know it's a lot, so I appreciate it. So Gwen's contact is here, as well as Brittany. Brittany Winslow is the owner of Emerge and the Therapeutic Edge. And is a occupational therapist and is still like very involved in all of the things that we do all the time here. So she's a great person to chat with too, and you can contact her there. Thank you to everyone saying thank you and see ya. I know it. I know it's a good webinar when it goes over and everyone stays. So thank you guys so much for your time today. This will be up on YouTube within like a week or so. So if you're watching it live now, thank you so much for being here. But if you're watching a replay of it, thanks for taking the time to learn more from Gwen, and just for staying connected with Emerge and the Therapeutic Edge. Please go download those placements. They are so fun. And we have a lot of really great resources on the Therapeutic Edge website. And we hope to stay connected with you guys. Thanks so much for being here. More to come on September's webinar. And oh shoot, okay. The raised hand was a mistake, so we didn't miss a question. I'm glad we cleared that up. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you, Gwen. You're the best. And I hope everyone has a wonderful Friday. See ya.